At least that's what happened when I was in school. So, yeah, it's true.
So the Blue Rock.
Yes.
Is that Hartford?
No, that's the one that's out by the San Bernardino.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking at the table.
I'd rather have like now.
I'm gonna make them.
Now.
Does that work?
It's okay because
Your neighbor may not think so,
Well, I will stand by them.
okay. For stand up.
it's nice.
So when I went to Roswell, it was like the kids I graduated.
Right.
2,500. So we're going down to. I mean, what is capacity? Because I think like
United Foods.
Look at it closer.
I used to catch the inside of my.
that's
Because it would be like some small sergeant.
I think it's okay if I hand out one.
Or maybe it's in here. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Again,
No,
it's a 1-2.
just that one initial version.
We got something.
Yeah.
Nice running.
Right.
I just like the whole vibe of
Really.
Yeah.
You've been out there.
Oh, yeah.
Voodoo Donuts. The street food. Yeah, it's just like.
Yeah.
I love you go from desert.
I don't feel like people would have it.
Riverboard, Valley, Mount Hood to the ocean.
Yeah.
My dad actually
Oh, did you really? Okay.
so I have some. And then
I have a bunch of comments that I wrote on
I like the area.
Well, I know I have a coworker who's kind of closer to T in their street. It's like
somewhere in here.
this house is in Sioux Falls, this house is in T, these two are in Lebanon, it's all over the place. And some of them saying that when they started developing an area, it was technically T, but there must have been some individual people or developers who like petitioned to have the house like within the Sioux Falls. And so they did, so it's a complete weird mix over
I
there.
was wondering why we couldn't put the challenge center in McGovern or take 170 kids from somewhere to McGovern. There aren't so many
We only made
busing and stuff, but I'm just saying none of these help no more.
It's really not public meeting. You'll see them on
But they don't even know.
Thank you for that. I needed that.
I want to know how long some kids are going to be on
I didn't even, because I'm so used to that.
I thought you were talking about schools.
Yeah, I know. The one in the green.
Right.
Yeah,
No, yeah, right. Throw that one there. The other one over there.
I did have.
That's all you need, right? Right.
I had some peanut butter energy bites I wanted to bring in with me, but I thought I should probably leave them in the car. You never know.
You know?
Yes.
It's the only state I know where you can't pump your own gas.
New Jersey, I don't know. New Jersey.
Yeah,
used to be
but
like
it was
that.
like, okay, I'm gonna pull up at the gas station and you can't pump your gas. So the attendant comes out and I'm like,
Yeah, like 19.
And that's what, yeah, so this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Not everybody.
Center.
Voodoo Donuts, you know what it looks like? And there's this line.
Yeah.
It's like a nightclub. People waiting to get in. You didn't know at the time, right? And then finally, like the first year, so you got to go to Voodoo Donuts.
Yeah.
That's Voodoo Donuts. It's a line all the way down the thing to get this thing that's not any good.
I know, right? No, it's good. That's special. You know, I do things like that.
I guess you gotta go.
You gotta
tourist.
That sounds good.
Then you start talking athletics and activities.
What are you talking about? I was trying to blame it on that.
Discovery. Yeah, it's chaos sometimes, but it's kind of great.
It is.
You make seeing kids running around. There's a house right outside. One of my good luck at and I was like, well, you should just come find me.
Right.
Come join the new one.
Right, exactly.
She's like, I would. It's like,
What's that?
come on.
Yeah.
Join the crowd.
So you're like hyper vigilant now, right? Any phone thing. It's and then two.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. It is 5:30. Folks, we're going to get started. 5:30, and we've got a lot of work to do again tonight. Thank you for coming back, and thanks for being a part of this process. Again, we've got a lot of things to cover. You have an agenda in front of you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over right away to our co-chairs.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're on time and ready to get started. I shared with Kent earlier this week that it's been nice to see all of the dialogue that's taken place outside of our organized task force meetings. That means that you all are taking this matter seriously, that you all are listening to your community members, parents of students, And that is so vital to this process. So thank you for the extra homework that you all have done, and I will turn things over to Doug right now.
All right.
Do you need the mic?
I'll try to use this one. I think everyone can hear me. Everyone hear me okay? All right, good evening, everybody. Been lots of activity. I appreciate all your emails and ideas, and we've tried to look at those and be respectful of those. In some cases, we've created a new version. And so what I want to kind of go back and just look at the middle school options that we have, both that we had the first night and ones that we've created additionally, just to get everyone level set on what those are. And hopefully you were able to look at your material ahead of time, but if not, you'll soon see. So this is version 1, and the original version 1 that we created, you want to put the overlay piece up there, Nicole. In the original version 1, you can see where my red light is. We had that, that is a current walk area to Edison, and we had that going up to McGovern. And so thanks to some good feedback that came through the Let's Talk portal, we soon realized that wasn't, a very good option. And so, but we felt the rest of it was pretty solid, or at least a option to look at. And so what we did was we essentially brought the Edison line up to here to encompass all of this this walk area right there. And then we also, at least in this version, heard from, we had one time had this Cherry Creek area going to McGovern, and it's a current Discovery school. And so we put that back in there. And then when we moved these kids back into Edison, it sort of, it made, overloaded Edison a little bit when you look at it in terms of having both the Spanish program there and the Challenge Center. And so in the revised version 1, we moved the Challenge Center into Patrick Henry, and that load leveled those two schools. And so that's really what the new version 1 is, and those were the changes that were made to that. Now, in this version 1, if you think about what's really happening here, is that version 1 is attempting to create some capacity in the current memorial area by moving JFK into Edison, which is where it was historically at one time. And so that takes some relief off of Memorial, and instead of busing them up to McGovern, it takes them into Edison. And like I said, historically it was at Edison at one time. So that's conceptually what that version is doing. Version 2 is a little bit, most of the stuff on the what I'll call the east side is very similar to the other option, except what this option does is it's moving JFK back into Memorial, and it is taking Pettigrew, and it is busing it up to George McGovern, again, in an attempt to create some capacity on this west side. If you think about Memorial, it's basically, I think of it as 4 quadrants, okay, or 4 elementary schools that feed Memorial today. You have Discovery up here, which is basically a walk area, and then you have Pettigrew, and you have JFK, and you have Oscar Howe. And so those are sort of the 4 quadrants that you are dealing with. So if you wanted to create capacity in this group, because it is our biggest middle school today, it runs at about 1,300, you have to move something somewhere. And so in this option, we created an option which is a skip busing option, which means these kids are bused here today, and so they would continue up the road to George McGovern. Doesn't make it right or wrong, it's just an option that we're presenting, again, to try to create relief over here. Also, additionally, we've acquired some land out here, so in a sort of a deal that we have with the Lennox School District, we'll be adding out here. And so maybe when this is filled in, it doesn't look so drastic as it does today. It kind of looks like that. So that's essentially what option 2 does. And it also, there were some minor changes out here. This strip is actually Cleveland today. And so if you preserve Cleveland, you would have that go to Ben Rifle. In the first option, we have it going to Whittier. It's a small number of kids, but that's one of the changes. If you're curious, just get this on the table. I call these the 3 Western nubs, so to speak. I don't know how else to call them, but there's about 81 kids in total that are in those 3 areas. About 24 there and about 57 between those 2, just for future reference if you're curious about what those are. Let's see. Version 3. Version 3 is essentially, again, another way of looking at the west side. And this, what it does is it keeps Pettigrew going to, and Discovery both going to Memorial. And it takes an area here, which is the current bus areas for Oscar Howe and the JFK area, and it moves them up to McGovern. And so again, that's another option that is trying to create capacity over here and moving it up to McGovern. So that's essentially what, when you think about option 3, what option 3 is doing. Option 4 is a new option. So taking feedback that we heard, kind of talking amongst the team, we went back and said, well, we should create an option that essentially preserves the memorial area, right, to see what that would look like. And so essentially we created option 4, which is a more traditional view. It keeps all of the memorial area like it is today, except for this strip, and I'll come back to this. And so that would essentially, if you look at the numbers at the end of the day, this school would stay at about 1,300 kids. And that school has been added on to, so it is a school that is built for a capacity of about 1,300 kids. So you could say, well, everybody in this area would keep going there. It doesn't create any growth opportunities, and they'll just continue to be sort of crowded or at capacity, but not much room for growth. We did move this strip here, which is the strip between Marion Road and I-229 or I-29 into Edison, thinking that Marion Road was a natural boundary and that we could move those kids over to Edison to create some, so we weren't running at 1,400, we could run at 1,300. And so that was essentially one of the items that we looked at from that perspective. And then we also, in this option, we moved, since we moved more kids into Edison, we moved the challenge program into Patrick Henry. So instead of both the Spanish immersion program and the challenge or the honors program, we moved the honors program into Patrick to try to load level these 2 schools.
Doug, do you have any projections for growth rates to the west of the TLS Road in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yep. So after I speak, Chris from the city are going to come up and go through some growth projections for the city or how they see it, and then we can talk about that a little bit. So,
thank you.
So that's essentially option 4. So I say it's just kind of a more traditional view. Option 5, or I call I guess I'm calling the draft option, because at this point it's an option that one of the task members, I can't remember the last meeting, they asked us to look at a a boundary scenario that would sort of level the demographics at Memorial from a socioeconomic standpoint. And so really to do that, you have to look more at a north-south boundary option. And so in this one that we created, you can see that Memorial comes down here and it brings part of Hayward into Memorial, and then it's moving some of the JFK, Oscar Howe areas up to McGovern. And so when you do that, you get more of a blending of students, and you and it's just more of a traditional north and south view, which is how we sort of district some of our high schools to make sure that our demographics are more balanced. So that was an option that we created, again, at the request of you guys. So, and net, there's a little bit of a change between Memorial and McGovern, but it kind of preserves the same numbers, and I think you guys have all those numbers in front of you, and we can come back to that.
Before you move on, I don't think I see a large scale version of version 5. Is there a large poster of version 5?
Not yet. We haven't created that yet.
Yeah, it didn't look like it. So would you mind just telling us a little bit the story of where those boundaries are drawn, since we won't be able to see it later?
So in here?
Yeah, just what are those streets, just to give us some insight.
Yeah, I think we can go to put the elementary school overlay on here. So you can see this is JFK, all of JFK going, half of Oscar Howe here, and then a strip in here of Hayward. So then what you really have then at Memorial is you have Pettigrew, you have Discovery, and then you have part of Hayward. So this purple area there is Hayward. So you have a blending of those three schools, and then at McGovern you have those areas. Now I want to go back, and you guys have been great at thinking out of the box and creating some different options for us to look at, and so I want to kind of go back through those. And the first one I want to look at is Mr. Miller submitted this one for us to look like, and if you think about it, I didn't create another version, but you can think of his version 4 is very much like our version 4. The difference is that in his version, he has Cleveland going to Ben Rifle, and all of John Harris going to Patrick Henry. And so in our version, we have Cleveland going to Ben Rifle, and we have John Harris split. Keeping Cleveland in Ben Rifle helps us balance our demographics a little more. And so the option that the version 4 option that we went is basically those two changes. So good option. Appreciate the feedback, but just so you're kind of aware, because I know some of that was exchanged with the task force. Want you to know we're listening, we're looking at it. So, but that's the basic change between this version 4 and the version 4 that we created. Then we had a option submitted by Stephanie Witt, which was a option to take this area, and essentially this would be Edison. So you'd be taking Pettigrew, JFK, Laura Wilder into Edison, and then you would be taking it would be Discovery, and you can see that would be the new Memorial. McGovern would sort of wrap around here. The problem that when we looked at this was this area here is a walk area for Edison, and I think it was showing as going to over here. And then the other item with that scenario is it would put it said down here, it would put about 1,084 kids at Edison and a little over 1,000 at Patrick Henry, and that's before the specialty school allocation. So once I layer in another 500 kids between those two schools, it makes it too big. Or I have to move the specialty program up into here or somewhere, which then takes it out of a central location, and we have a lot of people from the city moving out to the fringes. So, so again, we did look at that option, we dimensioned it, but didn't bring forward a full option on that. And then Emily submitted some this morning, so quickly kind of looked at those. And I would first compliment you on the great drawings, right? Very clear, very. But she had an idea of version 1, which was moving I call it the Cherry Creek area, and then these up here, moving those into McGovern, which is about 81 students, and then flipping part of JFK, I think, back into Memorial, and then this strip that we had outlined in version 4 into here. So it's kind of a switch out here. So net, I don't think it made a lot of difference in the student counts. It could be doable. It could certainly be, another option. It just didn't have time to completely throw everything out there, but it would be very similar, again, to try to take the west side and instead of JFK, moving this in here. So kind of a blend of R4 and option 1. And then there was another option here, again, where she was looking at our version 4, moving these, what I call 81 kids up into McGovern, and then moving about 156 kids out of this JFK area that was separated by Holbrook Avenue, I think, but moving more of these kids into Edison. Again, the problem when you do that is if you move more kids into Edison, it makes Edison too big if you have, because of the specialty programs there. So great options. Again, we continue to look at variations of these things, and I suspect that we will continue to look at minor or changes, and even when we take whatever you guys come up with as sort of realistic options to take to the community is going to have more feedback, and there could be some of these type of discussions that the board may very well end up at. So that's kind of where we're at. And then I wanted to cover really quick the Let's Talk app, which we've had live, and just give you a sense of what we're seeing for feedback. We at the point that Deanne pulled this, we had about 72 comments, and I would say that most of them, the majority of them coming from the Pettigrew area on option 2, where we were skip busing them up to McGovern. So that's clearly the group that we have heard from. Maybe because they're the most organized or the most passionate, I don't know, but that's the one that we've heard loud and clear from, that they don't like that option, and there's some of the reasons that they've given. So the next pool of comments that we heard was we had some comments on that first version 1 where we revised it to put the walk area to move it up to keep that in Edison. It's really this area here on this bus route. We had this, not dimensioned correctly in the first one. So that's how we kind of caught that. So feedback is great. So we made that adjustment. And then there was just a few other comments that we've had. Now, granted, we haven't really taken these formally to the community, because the idea is that, you as a team will, through 3 meetings, come up with some options and have the freedom to brainstorm and create and whatever, and so, but it's just reasonable. Things get out in the community, right, and options. So what would normally go through our 5 meetings, we're getting feedback on already on an option that might not even go that far, but it is nonetheless. That's the feedback that we've gotten so far. So with that, you guys asked for a little overview on growth. And so Sam and Chris from the city have prepared a presentation on growth areas, what you can expect, what they're seeing from a city perspective, and where those are going to happen. And so I might turn it over to Chris or Sam. You want to say anything first?
Yeah, I'm Sam Trebilcock again with City of Sioux Falls Planning. And with me tonight is Chris Anderson, who's with our GIS office. Chris did most of the work. I just told him what to do. And he innately figures out some things that I tell him to do and says, Sam, you really don't really want that. You want something else. So he's good about that. And again, thanks to Chris for all the work he put into this. What we really wanted to do and what I heard from you guys was you want to just get an idea what the growth potential is of the Sioux Falls district, kind of as overlaid with some of the different options, the middle school options. So first of all, the middle school options we're showing up here are the original ones, those 1, 2, and 3. I don't think it's going to change it a huge amount, but just so you know that. Everybody should have gotten at your table kind of a summary of all the different options, showing kind of and I'll explain what everyone means as we go through this, but it's important to kind of go through those because they're in different phases of development, each one of those columns. So on the map here, what Chris is showing is 2 different pie charts depending on the different option, middle school option. Option 1 and option 1 at the top there is the current units that you have in each middle school. So anything, all the number of current housing units in that district. And generally you'll see with each option, they're about the same and they're pretty well distributed in terms of the number. The thing that gets interesting, of course, is what you want to know is the future units, which is down below. And by the different middle schools, we show that there, whether it's Ben Rifle, George McGovern, Patrick Henry, Whittier, Edison Memorial. What you'll see, and is pretty consistent across the different options, is how George McGovern and Ben Rifle have the most future units. Not surprisingly, but it's important to note that amongst the 3 different units, or 3 different options. When you get into the Patrick Henry, Whittier, Edison, there isn't a lot more units to develop in that area. So again, that's important for us to highlight. Chris, maybe if you go down to the Ben Rifle area and zoom into that area, can you see the, yeah, turn on the future housing units. So you get a better idea what we're talking about. So the units that kind of show up with the little lots, those are the urban unplatted units that we show on in that column. So those are units that have been approved. They're ready to be built on. They're annexed, they're zoned, they're platted, and developers are putting houses on them, probably as early as this year. I mean, a lot of those houses have already been developed, but these are still yet to be built on. But they have been approved. They're spoken for. These are things that you could probably see being built on within the next 5 to 10 years. And most of those units will be developed within the next 5 to 10 years. So what we're showing there then also is maybe if you just show Chris the urban unplatted units. So those units, or those parcels there, they're annexed and they're zoned. So again, within the next 5 to 10 years, you'll probably see a lot of these parcels being developed. They just haven't been platted yet, fully platted. So that's what those units are looking at. Yeah, can you show this? Yeah. Yeah. So if you zoom out just to that whole Ben Rifle area, you can kind of see again, and turn on the other units too, Chris. And if you turn on the 1 through 3, there isn't a lot of what I'll be showing in another areas are future units that are not annexed yet, are not included. They're still to be developed. And there's quite a few of those units in like the McGovern area. But that kind of shows you that Ben Rifle area. So maybe go over to McGovern then, Chris. And this is a little different story. The McGovern area kind of has the opposite types of units, future units. You can see with any of the different options, you can see how many future tier unit options that there are. There's a huge number yet, but those are much into the future. You're probably looking at most of those units within the next 10 to 25 years. So we're going to start to see those units coming on. Because those haven't been annexed. A lot of times the land hasn't been, still being farmed. They're not willing, they're not ready to move on to that next development stage. You can see on the other side of things, those planned urban units, those units that are already platted, they're annexed, they're zoned, they're being ready to be built on. There's not a lot of units in that McGovern area yet. So with it, over the next 5 to 10 years, you're probably not going to see quite as much until those future tier units come on. That some of those that are contiguous to the city limits, that are adjacent to, could come on fairly soon. We just don't know for sure, but probably within the next 10 years. Now, if you go down to Memorial, that's the only other one that, there's a lot of capacity issues at Memorial currently, but with the different options, you can see there's not a lot of additional units coming into that, any of the options that you're looking at, any new units. The future tier units is 400. The others you're looking at about 400, 500 different units. So Memorial is filling out. The only wild card on that, and Doug talked about, is that Lennox Swamp area. When that area does come on, you're probably looking at, and that's the area that Chris is kind of showing right there. That area, you're probably looking at about another 1,300 units. About 300 of those we could see fairly soon, just developing as the city goes. I mean, whether it's Lennox or in Sioux Falls, it's going to happen. And then future, kind of about more of that 10 to 25, about another 900 units. So, but that's coming in the future. So that kind of takes you a run through. What I'd want to do is maybe just take some questions that we have. I don't want to spend and belabor it too much, but that I do know that everybody thought it was important to get some information.
Is what you have laid out there the entirety of that Lennox swap, or does it go all the way to the west, that entire boundary?
That should be, and I'm looking around, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, that's, I think, the area.
What's platted?
Yeah, that yellow area that we're showing there, that's the initial Lennox swap area. I don't know if there'd be any in the future, but that's what they're talking about.
Thanks, Sam and Chris. So when we think about that, or how I think about that, is if you looked at your sheet here that Sam gave you, if you kind of look at how I kind of equate it, or I've tried to equate it, is if you look under Ben Rifle, there's about 974 planned units, right? Well, how many kids does that translate into? So I took the 974 and basically divided it into the number of current units and said that's about 8%. So you could think of it as about 8% growth that we know is planned there, probably for certain in the next 5 years. If you bump that up against what we have tagged in that current Ben Rifle area, which is 900 and something, you could expect another 75 to 100 students maybe over the course of the next 5 years or so in that growth area. McGovern is much longer term, and we know we have capacity at McGovern. So you're kind of looking for metrics on growth and how it relates to schools. That's how I think about it and how we think about it when we're kind of looking at that. The next area that I wanted to touch on was busing, because we had some questions on busing. So I thought it would be a good idea just to level set everyone on how busing is in the district today at a middle school level. So we tried to create this map for you that would give you a sense of what that is. So think about, this is the current middle school boundaries. This is Memorial, and the light green are walk areas, and the dark green are the bus areas. McGovern is 100% busing. This is Edison. You can see this lighter shade of the brown is the walk area for Edison. Everything else is a bus area. Patrick, you can see the light green walk area, dark green bus area, and then you can see Whittier here, light area, walk area, and the dark blue is bus area. When you look at it all rolled up, I think business manager Vic gave you a number, about 61% of our kids are bused at the middle school level. Now, if you think about it, what will Ben Rifle do is, we don't exactly know because we have to work with the city on safe bus routes and underpasses under Highway 11 and everything, but theoretically there will be another walk area at Ben Rifle, which is now a bus area either in Whittier or Patrick. So that should create some less busing as a whole. You would think logically with six middle schools instead of 5, it would do that over time. And so that's kind of how we think about it. So I don't know that on average, in any scenario that we're looking at, it would create on average longer bus routes. Now you could argue, as I'm sure the Pettigrew folks as well, our bus route's going to be longer. Yeah, that may be but on average, the whole district should incur probably less busing costs or shorter bus routes. I look at Patrick Henry as an example. Today, all of these kids are going and being bused into either Patrick or Edison. They'll have a much shorter route into Ben Rifle now. So it would be impossible for us to create what I will say bus routes, because it's a very tedious process, and only once we get to our boundaries will we create bus routes and what streets we're going to use. But it should be, what we're creating shouldn't be any more burdensome from a busing route on average than what we have today. So I just wanted to give you that perspective on busing and how it works today. I use the example, this may seem like a long bus route up here. You're going here, but then you're trucking up here, but certainly not any longer than these kids have over here. So again, we're dealing with some averages. Some may be longer, some may be shorter, but I don't think any option that you'll be looking at is going to put on an average the district at an incremental cost basis, or on average that our kids are going to be on the bus 10 minutes longer. Should be shorter. on an average, I would think. So,
I know you keep using the Pettigrew area as your example with the longer bus routes, but basically what you're saying is we're going to make all the other areas better with their times while you would make the Pettigrew one worse with Group 2 or version 2. Does that make sense?
I'm saying with any option, there's trade-offs. There's kids that,
Right.
I mean, today we have kids that go to Edison that are closer to Patrick Henry. It's just the
Right,
nature of creating a boundary, and that you're going to have those scenarios because of where the middle schools are physically located in town, and trying to also balance demographics and everything else.
Yep.
Busing is certainly a consideration.
Which I understand, but
Yep.
I just feel like we're trying to get to a better place with the busing, where people right now do have to be bused all the way from one corner over to Edison, and these fix that. So why would we try and make it worse for other areas when we don't have to? I guess is my point.
I'd like to say that everybody would get better. I don't know that that's a realistic scenario. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I guess when you look at it, you could say, yes, the people at in this case in option 2, right, which you're moving Pettigrew up to skip busing it up to George McGovern, right? But if you look at that scenario, all those kids that are moving from that currently are all the way over at Whittier that are going to McGovern, their bus ride gets a lot shorter. So like I said, on average, you can't necessarily make everyone shorter. You can just try to look at realistic scenarios to do that.
Right. I just feel like some of the other options do make it nice for everyone. Like the version 4, that's more of a block setting. So you
Yeah,
don't have.
I think what we tried to do was in several scenarios was to look at the West Side Memorial and knowing that you have 4 quadrants, what you could do to alleviate that. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying we gave you options to consider, and through the 3 meetings, you would weed out the ones that you didn't feel were realistic, and I think that's still the hope. And so I see this as work product for the task force, not options that are going to the community now, but that's what it's turned into, unfortunately. So I still think of this as your work product. And at the end of meeting 3, we'll hopefully narrow it down to a couple options that then can go to the community. But I just want you guys to have the freedom to be able to discuss, create, say what if, and that's sort of what we've tried to create is a palette of those types of opportunities for you, knowing that certainly some of them might be more popular than others, and nobody has the perfect scenario. And so we've tried to give you some different views of how that might look. To be honest, skip busing in other bigger communities is something that you see a lot, but it may be something that this task force has no desire for, and that's what we hope to find out. So we've just tried to give you a palette of options, and you guys have been great at bringing stuff back to us, and we've tried to be. I think in the case of our option 4 was very similar to one that was brought forward to us, and some other things for consideration that have come up through those. So I think that's kind of brings us probably a good breaking point now to.
Hey Doug, I do have a question on the buses, and I understand you can't give us the exact routes until you have one down there, but there's obviously criteria of what constitutes a walk area and what's a bus area. And if we can get that broke down and utilize that with the new middle school, just to project what we look like is going to be the walk area, to predict which one might cut the cost for the districts on buses, because some might be worse than others just based off criteria of what would be a walk area, not necessarily what's the actual bus route. And so,
Todd, do you have a view on how will the walk area for Ben Rifle be sort of determined? I know it's a lot of work with safe walk routes, and that you have Highway 11 to consider and those types of things.
Yeah, it's about a mile and a half is really farther than the squares, so it's
about a mile and a half. So when we do look into it, it's not to be across the highway or there is still. Did you get all that? Roughly a mile and a half, and get a little longer when you know, because you're looking at usually blocks, and get to about mile 7 is about as far out as we'll go, 1.7 miles or so. Then we also look at if like South Dakota is a Highway 100 or Highway 11, I call it Highway 11. Highway 11, how that will look and how kids can get across that will help develop that. But usually it's about a mile and a half, and pretty much anything that is a walk area now, we would envision hopefully not moving, and so the other 5 schools, the walk area would probably stay the same, and then we try to go out up to about a mile and a half, and hopefully we can come up with safe routes to schools, working with the city for the kids to get across that.
Sounds good. Folks, this is a good time to break into small groups. We're going to keep you at your tables here, but the idea is give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that have been discussed. And we're going to go maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and we're going to just have you reporting out on some of the things that you've discussed, okay? So 15, 20 minutes.
Before we do that, I have one quick question about the economic status data that's in the new packet.
Sure.
It seems like it's substantially different for the versions this week as compared to last week, even on versions that didn't particularly change very much, and even before the specialty allocation.
Yep, so like when I said in my email that I sent out with you with the packet, we updated all of the free and reduced price lunch data from the state. So when we originally created some of this stuff, we were using data that was back, probably status back in October. And so we've used the latest information from the state. And so that's why some of it has changed.
Huh?
Huh?
Like a lot.
Yeah, and
Like a
yeah.
lot.
Yep.
Like Patrick said.
15 or 20 minutes.
Yep, and I've got one more real quick too. Doug, just got one other quick thing.
It sounds like it's met a lot of criteria, but what are the natural boundaries they're using this for? I'm curious. I just have that called up so we can take a look at the natural boundaries.
The natural boundaries,
Yeah, like where are these lines? That's obviously at 29.
229.
Here and here, yeah,
yep.
that one I see, but like here, what are you doing there with the splitting of the neighborhood? Yeah, that's really, yeah, you could show us that so we can make sure the natural boundaries.
Sure, so if you, yeah, I can pull it up
Pull
there.
that one up.
Can you pull up the draft version? Maybe we can. Maybe it's easier to. I don't know if we don't have it in there. I guess just in Tableau. She wanted to see what the natural boundaries were for. Okay, yeah, she wanted to see what the natural boundaries were.
To see if you're divided we just can't keep creating without narrow in on some tweaks to it. So that's why I'm where do we see look like either division. So this is now also
Once we so they'll come back.
Last week's version was version 3. We're looking at 27, 21. This one is going up. Oh, yeah. But we haven't changed anything.
we updated all of the green reduced lunch student.
So this data, is this last week?
Put it this way, you can see that this was 33%. This is now 46%. We had a bunch of kids. We have kids that are. We have schools that are 100%. Those kids were not in the system as they were blank, almost like they weren't doing research. And so.
This is the more
yeah, yes, the grades. this is the newest one. It's you know, applications come in over time. You know, all hopefully we get them in before school. In some schools, we don't even these are designated gold, gray, red, another one. So they never apply, and the state doesn't tag them until later in the year. So we look like we have less until they do. And so we went back and ran all the files. This is the most yeah.
It makes people kind of yeah. That's all. They don't understand.
It's shaker hole.
Okay, folks, consider this your 2-minute warning. We're going to come back in about 2 minutes for our reporting out. Really good conversation, folks. Let's talk as a large group now. Really good conversations at our tables. Let's do some reporting out. Let's talk about what we discussed for the benefit of the room. Who wants to begin by reporting out? And I'm careful to note, again, please use your microphone and make sure that press the button and make sure that it's green before you begin. Who wants to begin? Over here. I see somebody grabbing for the microphone.
So we had a few different discussions. Emily's really excited about option 2. So
No.
just kidding. So we thought a few different things. There was the idea, we were looking at the different versions in variation from where we are today. And so we thought that the draft version and version 2 were very progressive, pushing the ball forward in terms of, in possibly an extreme way. We also thought that version 4 was maybe not pushing the ball forward enough, that it was very close to what we currently have. So then we looked at version 3 and version 1, and some people at the table, I won't speak for all, but some people at the table thought version 3 was a good balance of both the socioeconomic diversity and contiguous neighborhoods, and that was a bend in terms of progress, but not breaking us.
Others?
So we spent a little less time focusing on, the actual versions themselves and more discussion about, in some of the versions, how we really weren't making much of a change in the socioeconomic. And one of the things that we'd like to understand a little bit better is an idea of moving one and or both of the Challenge Center Spanish immersions out to George McGovern, thinking that, first of all, a lot of those families are choosing to bus anyway to come into a program. There's probably going to be a socioeconomic lift, and I think we're still talking about those schools really just channeling through to, Edison and then Lincoln. So what if we talk about making a shift of some of those programs out to George McGovern? Or Whittier, for that matter. We just don't know if Whittier has the room in terms of facility and structure.
Yeah. I don't think anything is off the table. So I think if that's a sort of something you want to communicate to the board as a possible option is to move those specialty programs. Certainly have can do that.
Well, I think the thing that's hard to understand, without diving deeply into the numbers, is could we preserve some more of those neighborhoods where we're getting some of that pushback if we really take a look more at just programmatically shifting a program out to George McGovern?
Yeah.
And if so, what would the impacts of that be, one and or both?
Sure. I think, the impact is you're taking a program that's pretty much centralized in the central part of town where people come into, and then you're pushing it up to the farthest school in the district. That's the downside, from that perspective.
Let's keep it going.
Right or wrong, which is,
Others, please.
Just to clarify, Doug, did you say earlier in the night that Memorial was at 1,300? That's capacity at that school?
Right. That school's been added on to. So it's a little bigger than the other ones just because of the growth over time we've built onto that school. So I think on the one sheet you see that the capacity is, I think it's the one that has all the comparisons. Capacity is like right at 1,300.
Yeah, so. It says 1,319, and just to be clear, and that says at 90%. So does that mean it's actually 1,469? Are we looking at the right way or not?
That's at the utilization rate. I mean, we give like an 85% utilization rate and a 90% utilization rate. Jeff, do you want to comment on that at all?
That's how you can schedule.
Hey, please use the microphone.
90
Just trying to help them out.
That's a utilization rate, so you can make those class schedules work. 90 is really a high utilization, so that's what the 1,300 is. So if you want to be below that, if you certainly can, it makes the building operate much better.
How many times has Memorial, we've added on to that? Has it been one, twice? How many times?
So we put 3 additions on.
Three additions, okay. So.
I guess to follow up on that, I think all of us at the table were in favor of the 3 pockets to the west of the TLS Road, having them at McGovern just because of the capacity issue. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Others? Please.
I also wanted to bring up the section of Lowell. In every one of these versions, Lowell is going to Patrick Henry, but some of those kids currently walk to Edison. So why would we be busing them to Patrick Henry when they could currently walk?
What else? Others?
While that other group is collecting their thoughts, we just wanted to echo the table over there, closest to Doug. We had an important conversation. It wasn't related to how we're going to rank these options, but we think it was a very important conversation, and we spent some time on it. And that conversation is, we do think it's very important. A big criteria for all of these schools that we're looking at is having a balance of socioeconomic status. And we talked about some of the importance of that. And we also talked about the fact that many of these options move the needle in a great balanced way, but we have Whittier where that needle does not move at any point. So I think we want to say kudos to that table over there, and I think that that's a future discussion that I certainly want to hear, and I think I can speak safely for many of us that we'd love to have that conversation as well.
Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry, I can't see your name. John.
John.
Please.
Just for the record, I do want to state that I do think it's important, and we haven't seen diversity in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the geography of ethnicity. We've seen the raw numbers, and I think we need to go down to the elementary school level to see really what's going on so we can make the right decision in terms of diversity, ethnicity at the middle school level. And until we see that, I don't think we can make an adequate decision. I'm also troubled by how much we seem to leave Ben Rifle and Whittier alone. They don't change much with any of the options in terms of diversity, in terms of race. I think we need to explore that more. And those are my two main concerns. I think we're not looking at race enough, and I think we need to, especially in these times.
Thank you. Others? What else? You get it all? Folks, in front of you, you have a document that includes, can I borrow yours? It says middle school ranking. This is really a pulse check. And the idea here is we'd like you to take some time as individuals and give us a sense of what you like. Again, ranking the items. Again, this is a pulse check. We'd like you to fill it out. Take a few minutes. We'll be around to collect them, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Okay? So we'll give you a few minutes to fill these out.
The draft version on the screen.
Yep, perfect. Yep, that's it, yeah, that's it, when you start talking about high school. Maybe with my laser. Mess you up with somewhere. Oh, thank you. Left brain, right brain. So we're going to do a spreadsheet. Is that after the spreadsheet? Is that something we can share? Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else still working? Anyone else still working?
All right. You have high school? Nicole, can you pull up high school? Sorry. Todd should come over and help Austin. All right. Start to like our kind of how we outlined the meetings. We are going to at the end of meeting second meeting start to talk about high school, and then that's certainly what we'll devote the last meeting to, as well as any follow-up middle school items. So high school is it's hard to create, when you're still dealing with middle school, to create infinite amount of high school versions, but we did give you a sense of, we took version 4 of middle school and came up with a high school option, which we're presenting to you as sort of a starting point of what a high school boundaries might look like. And so that's what we presented here in your packet. So you can see Jefferson here, Roosevelt here, Lincoln, and then Washington. And then if we overlay that with the middle schools, what you would see then is that in how this lines up is, you can see Ben Rifle feeds into Washington, and Patrick feeds into Lincoln. Edison feeds into Roosevelt, And then you have all of Whittier feeding into Washington. And then, or no, excuse me, you have all of McGovern feeding into Jefferson, and the two schools that you have split basically are you have Memorial that's feeding part of it into Thomas Jefferson, and then part of it into Roosevelt. So thinking about 4 high schools, or four high schools, 6 middle schools, that's the best you can do. So you have 4 middle schools that are feeding in its entirety to unique high schools, and then you have two middle schools that are splitting into high schools. And so that's what that version has that we're presenting to you. So if we can get the middle schools sort of starting to narrow down, we can create a few more high school scenarios that try to do much of that. So you don't have 6, so you don't have middle schools feeding all different kinds of high schools. And then also in this option 1, you can see that Lincoln ends up being a little bit smaller. And you can put up the high school with the students on there. We get a lot of open enrollment into Lincoln, both external to the district and internal internal amongst the district, for a variety of reasons. But that's just, and so we know we have a pipeline of probably 600 kids that are open enrolled to Lincoln today. And that's sort of how the pattern works today. Now, some of that can be created because Roosevelt's been closed. There's just as an open enrollment to the other schools. We don't know essentially how, if we're going to have a lot of open enrollment once some of that capacity frees up, if we'll have a lot of open enrollment to Thomas Jefferson or any other schools. So we're just kind of looking at where we get a lot of an open enrollment today, thinking that will continue. And so we've, in this version, Lincoln is probably the smallest of all of them in this scenario for that reason.
Quick question, Doug. One thing I noticed, I don't see the capacity for the high schools in here, and then we did for the middle schools. Do we have those numbers that we could get?
Yeah, we do. Are they all about 18? I don't want to put you on the spot. 1,800-ish. I mean, obviously Roosevelt's at 2,400 now. We can get those
Great.
for you.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on Tony's question, do we have the ability to get the socioeconomic data for the high schools, just like we've seen for the middle schools as well?
Yeah, is that in the book? Let me go through it. Yeah, it's in the book right below there. So,
my apologies.
No, that's okay. A lot of data, so so that's kind of the version that we're bringing you tonight. I think if we, like I said, if we can start to narrow the scope on the middle schools, we'll create a couple more for you at the next meeting. But if you just want to take some time amongst the table to kind of transition to high school using the one option, I know there's not something else to compare it to other than the current boundaries, but is there something that you generally like, don't like, looking at the demographic information compared to currently? You guys just want to take a few minutes to kind of talk amongst your table about high school, that'd be great. Yep. Todd, do we bus the kids to New Tech? I think we have. Do we bus kids? We don't bus any high school kids, right? No. New Tech? New Tech?
We do bus to New Tech from each of the, you have to get to your home.
So we bus to New Tech. The question was, do we bus to New Tech? And we do from each home high school. And then we have CT, of course, that a lot of our kids participate in, and there's buses that go up to CT as well.
Excuse us. We just were wondering, what does the current boundary lines look like? You were referencing them, but what do they currently look like for the high schools? Because that's the version, but what do the current lines look like?
The current high school versions, I think is that in the workbook? I think in your, maybe not. It's not. We'll pull it up. I should have brought that other map in. Nicole asked me, do we need these other maps? I go, no. Yeah.
Okay, about 2 more minutes, and we'll have your report out. Okay. Again, more good conversations. More good conversations. Let's do some more reporting out. Again, who wants to begin? I'll remind you, use your microphone. Who wants to start? Go ahead, right here. Go ahead.
So one of the observations that we had in our group was it's somewhat difficult to determine where we want to go with the high schools if we're not entirely settled on what we're doing with the middle schools. And so and maybe you're already headed down this path, but we thought we would suggest or raise up the idea that we take the pulse vote, the runoff vote that we just had, and if we were to take the top 3 and then use that as a stepping stone to create 3 versions of the high school model based on the results of the pulse that we just took on the middle schools.
Yep, definitely. That's our plan.
Others?
What we had noticed was Roosevelt's really only going to decrease by about 500 students, and we have concerns that that's not enough to help relieve Roosevelt enough, especially with the addition of the new high school. We were noting that we don't think the principal would be satisfied with that, as that's not quite enough students to make the students feel less like sardines.
Okay, great.
Others?
As we expressed in the middle school piece, without getting into the weeds and programs, we would like to see the district consider looking to perhaps Thomas Jefferson, perhaps Washington for specialty schools rather than having those feed into Lincoln the way they do now to help with that equity of socioeconomic and racial diversity in the district.
Okay.
Others?
Yeah. I'd also like to know what the CTE numbers are for each of these high schools. So CTE is that program that we have where kids get their base courses in their high schools and then go to the Career Technology Academy. So it'd be helpful if we had those numbers to be able to look at how many students are moving out for those half-day times.
Yes, yeah, we can get you that.
Others?
I know we'll be talking about this next meeting in regards to open enrollment, but right now Lincoln is currently at 1551 with version 1, Roosevelt 2018, Washington 1972. It's my understanding that the only way somebody can open enroll is if a school is at capacity or isn't at capacity. Is that correct for open enrollment?
Essentially the school that has the other schools are for the most part closed to open enrollment. Lincoln is the one that has the most open enrollment. It's about 600 kids currently.
So nothing really will change with that with the new high school opening up based on the version right now, it'll still be Lincoln and that's it for open enrollment, because other schools are still at capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I think the idea is to try to make them as equals. They're all about the same capacity. All the high schools are about the same capacity. So to the extent we can equal them out, and then it's as Dr. Nold will give a presentation at the next meeting on open enrollment and how we manage that today, probably be more clear to you.
Yes, when you mentioned that Lincoln is the most popular in terms of open enrollment, it begs the question why that is, I guess.
Well, obviously you have kids outside of the district that are coming in, internal to the district. You can, there's obviously the band, things of that nature that kids go to Lincoln for. We know there's a big presence of those kids in there, so for a variety of reasons. I couldn't tell you all their personal reasons for doing that. There's very little specialty program there in and of itself. So it's really just of where parents are choosing to send their kids for a variety of reasons, or where kids choose to go there. It's not that the academic offerings are complete or are much different, but like I said, we'll give you a presentation on that, an open enrollment at the next meeting. May become a little clearer to you.
I have a question. On the map here, where Roosevelt and Lincoln, would it be possible to cut into a little bit of that Roosevelt and put it in Lincoln so that Lincoln's numbers and Roosevelt would be reduced a little bit, be a little closer?
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible, as they say. So we can certainly look at that. And I think once we talk about the middle school, as was said over there, is that Anthony, is that if we can get to a couple middle school versions, that we can create some high school versions that try to preserve as much as we can middle schools going to high schools, without getting too crazy. That would always be the hope. So that's what we'll kind of take away. Probably a good segue to look at the pulse check. I want to call it a ballot, because it's not a ballot. We're still continuing to work. So, but this is where things came out. The first choice of everybody was version 3. Really, in between version 3 and version 1, and there was very little difference, separated by a couple points. And then version 4, the draft version, was pretty good distance behind that, and then version 2, it looks like, is not anybody's favorite. So that, I think, if everyone would be okay with that, so essentially we've created a high school version that matches 4. I know 4 isn't your choice, but what we will do for the next meeting is we will take version 1 and version 3 and look at a high school version that somewhat aligns to those versions, or maybe it's one version since it's really sort of similar. I mean, you're taking a piece of the southern part of Memorial and moving it, so maybe it's a similar option, but that's what we will do for you. At the next task force meeting, have some options for you. And then the other thing that I heard that we will look at is doing something between Whittier and Ben Rifle. Because I think we heard that from various tables, that they would like to see something on the east side that might balance those socioeconomic balance a little differently. So that's kind of what I've taken away from this. And so the next meeting would be another middle school version, looking at that, something like that. High school versions that match with version 1 and 3, and then we'll give you a presentation on open enrollment, how we manage that today as a district, and then get your feedback on transition rules. There's some things we're required to do by law, once a kid is open enrolled and his, their ability to stay in a school. And then there's some voluntary things like you might say, well, a senior in high school, incoming senior should get to stay at their school. Or maybe a 8th grader, right? But 7th graders and juniors, that's different. So we would like to get your thoughts on that at the next meeting as just kind of a good focus group, if you will, on how you would view transition rules or feedback to the board from that perspective. So that's kind of how I think of what I'm hearing.
A couple questions here. Go ahead.
Can we also just sort of push forth on some more information about moving some of these schools in a version 1 or version 2 middle school, moving Spanish immersion out to George McGovern? Or, I mean, I think we need to see how those scenarios would play, because we really feel very strongly that it's time to talk about a program discussion alongside the boundary discussion. Is that possible to do?
I don't know that programming is the role of this task force. I'm not sure that that's. I think at this point we've given you boundaries to work within, and those boundaries are or guidelines that would say we would like to keep the specialty schools as centralized as possible.
One of the challenges, and I think we're seeing this, right? One of the challenges with this is that there's a desire, right, to get really deep in this. And again, in 3 meetings, we really have to stay at a relatively high level.
Now, it's not to say that, again, what we're trying to do with the task force is to come up with some versions that can be taken to the community, not 10 versions, but a couple versions. And from that, we'll have feedback. We have a minimum of 5 public input sessions at each middle school, and we'll have probably a few others in the day for people who can't get there at night. And I think there'll be some other themes like that start to emerge for the board to consider. And then once the feedback sessions are done, of course, the board has until June. So I don't, I would say what we come out of here with the task force won't be the final option, just because we'll be hearing from a lot more people in the community with a lot more ideas. Certainly, we will note that there's a desire to consider moving programming to another place in the district. I would say at this point, as far as we're concerned, I think the desire is to keep those as centrally located in town as possible. And that's how I would frame it up at this point.
I wanted to say one word of appreciation to Deanne for the last email that we got following our meeting. That was really helpful with the link and the updated workbook and that sort of thing. What can we expect in the next communication with some of this information that will help us kind of communicate out to the public?
To communicate out to the public, or
to communicate with the public, excuse me, like
Oh.
the maps and like how much information will we have to talk amongst community members?
Yeah, my view of the boundary committee is that you guys are a work group to come up with some options to take to the community for feedback, and we have community events scheduled for that feedback. I view what you guys are doing in here as your work product, right? Is you guys are collaborating to come up with those options. If we take those to the public, if I take a version 1 to the public, a version 2, it starts to get a little bit murky. Not everybody has a chance to weigh in, so maybe it's only the organized group you're hearing from the loudest. So I would say keep it within your group. Not to say if you're out in the community talking to somebody. And then ultimately, I think once we come out of here, that version 1 through 5, or however we come up with 6, will become probably option A and B. And they'll take a new identity, so to speak, so that they can have a fresh view from the public, and that public isn't fixated on version 2, right? Or that we're presenting version 1 and 7. And so I think we'll take what's out of here hopefully get it down to version A and B of middle school, version A and B of high school, take those to the community, and keep the feedback coming in. And it's not to say that you as a community member, let's say that you voted for, you know, you like version 4. Doesn't mean that you can't come down to the community meeting and say, I like version 4, or here's why I like version 4, or make your voice known. You always have that option. Is sort of, I think once you step out of the task force, representing sort of trying to look at the community as a whole, you're still a stakeholder in whatever version, and you have every right then to sort of say, you know, this is the version I like or don't like, and still give that feedback. So I think you still have that option as well. So that hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Is everyone clear on next steps in our next meeting? February 19th is our next meeting. We'll meet here in this room, same time.
And to the extent I can get, you know, all of this, not I know he's my team, right? So they do all the work and I take credit for it and send it to you guys. So I always tell them that. No, it is an intricate process, right? To take anything and to work it through and to create the maps and the versions. And so the team does a great job at that. And as we can get some high school versions vetted, and we'll get them out to you as soon as we can ahead of the next meeting, so you have some time to look at it. And so our goal would be to get those out to you a couple days ahead of time so you can look at the materials before the next meeting. And then any commentary that I or the team can add to what you're looking at and things for consideration. So, and if you have comments in the meantime, send them on. I try to keep up with everything, or we try to keep up with everything and get back to you with your questions, and we'll still try to do that. I just appreciate the detail that you guys are looking at it, and the questions that you come up with, because it makes us better too, because we see things that we might not see in our team, and so you guys bring that different lens to us, just much like when we take out to the community and we have 25,000 set of eyes as opposed to 30 set of eyes, it creates even more things for us to look at that we're not considering. And that's what we're trying to create through transparency. Ultimately in June, it rests with 5 board members. And so that's hopefully they'll have a great process to be able to lead them to the decision that is the best for the most, knowing that it won't please everybody. So appreciate great meeting, great feedback. It's just happy with how everything is going so far.
Outstanding work. Again, February 19th in this room, same time. Again, you'll be receiving some email from the district. Again, thank you for being here. And with that, I'll turn things over to Kent.
I too would like to thank everybody for their work. One of the things that I want to make sure is that we remember the Let's Talk app, and that's the best way to get the information into the district, to get your questions answered, and get everything considered as we move forward. I would have to be honest with you and say that before the meeting this afternoon, I was a little apprehensive about how it was going to go, and I also have to be honest and say it went a lot better than I thought it was going to. So everyone's willingness to compromise, to be heard, and to listen is gonna push this forward in the best way possible for the students in our district, and that's what it's all about. Thanks.
worked at the corner, I remember. I've never seen We drove by, but yes, yes. So, Oh, I know. Yeah, right. That's right.
We're gonna have this 1 year of seniors. Better say 18, and whatever we said for the rest of the relevant, I don't remember. But pull that information.
Right next to me, always here.
So, that's you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went, Nan, see? That was what this charge was. So much grief. And I think we need to
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy. Yeah, that's what that's it. I'm not there for it. But even when I'm in my own bed, yeah. Right, exactly, yeah. That's what